Thank you, kind sir. Good morning. I got a couple notes for you that I want to share, and I want us to think about for just a minute or two. You know, your identity is like what you think about yourself, and a lot of times we have the wrong idea. You know, like when you go to the fun house or the carnival and you have the warped mirror. Remember that one? And you're seeing the wrong thing. It's because you're looking in the wrong place. You're looking at a bad mirror, and you can deceive yourself. And so what I want to do through this series is help us to put the funny mirror away and see yourself the way that God sees you. And today I want to talk about how you are chosen. What a beautiful song. Like you're a child of God. This is fundamental to who you are. And Jesus said it this way, you have to lose your life to what? To find it. If you can finally let go of the old identity, then you can find out who you really are. Jesus said you lose your life to find it. And going through the process of losing it can be difficult, can be a little painful. And today we're going to follow the Apostle Paul, who had to lose his life in order to find it. And last night I was watching Iron Man 3. Anybody? I don't know if I was going to relate to anybody. But anyway, Iron Man, he's the guy that makes the suits, right? And he's clothed himself in this sheet of iron, and he's got all this power, and he can do all these things. And it becomes his identity. Because and you can't touch him, because he's surrounded by iron, and he's got all these unbelievable gadgets. And what happens is in life, then he starts to confuse who he really is with the stuff that he created to surround himself with. You'll find the exact parallel with the Apostle Paul as I read it in a minute. But I got to tell you a little bit more about the story, because what happens in Iron Man is he ends up in a remote place in Tennessee, and his suit falls apart on him. And the picture that I want you to have in your head is Iron Man with his suit dragging through the snow, right? Non-functioning, carrying himself. Now he has to rebuild who he is. He meets this little boy in his dad's garage randomly, and he introduces himself as Tony, the mechanic. So a lot of times what has to happen in your life and in my life is you have to lose your life to find it. A lot of times these identity crises are in key transitions in our life. A transition from being a child to a young adult. That teen years can be hard on the identity. Sometimes moving from one career to another career. Going through a divorce. Losing a spouse or loved one. Moving from a nest full of children to an empty nest. I've seen this identity crisis a lot, because the identity was, I'm mom, I'm the coach, now I'm not, and all of these transitions, we find ourselves looking for, who am I really? I want to read a little bit for you. This is Paul, and this is Paul's big change. Acts chapter 9. Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. And he went to the high priest and asked for letters to the synagogues in Damascus. So if he found anyone there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. So Paul was a religious zealot. He was very confident in who he was. He didn't think there was anything wrong with him. He thought he was spot on. He was so confident in who he was at the time, and he decided that anybody else that believed or thought anything different should be brought into Jerusalem and should be reprimanded, caned, or worse, imprisoned. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him, and he fell to the ground, and he heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Sometimes what we're doing is we think it's right, we think it's correct, but what we don't realize is there's a lot of stuff that we don't yet know. Later on, Paul would write about this in 1 Timothy, and he said, my former way of life, I was ignorant. I was an ignorant and violent man. Ignorant and violent. By the way, they do oftentimes go together. Still seeing it today. Ignorance and violence. Because when you're ignorant, you just don't know something. Who here today is ignorant? Good answer. But we're all ignorant about something, and there's things that we don't know, and the hard thing is you don't, as they say, you don't know what you don't know. But the problem is when you're young, you think you know a lot. Anybody? No. The other day, Charlie's 6 now, so she knows a lot. And she's really happy to tell you what she knows, and she'll tell you when you're wrong. And so the other day, we got up and we were having breakfast, and, Mom was making a couple of comments to Charlie, and Charlie goes, "No, Mom." And I thought, I don't know if this is going to go good, And so, Charlie was trying to correct Mom about what she was wrong about, but Charlie didn't know what she was talking about. But she thought she knew, very confident. And so, Mom explained to her again, and she goes, "No, Mom, that's not right." And I thought, I don't know if this is going to go good. And it kept going, you know what I mean? And so I did what any sane person would do. I brought a major diversion. How about we watch cartoons? So you could see this thing coming to a head. Anybody ever been there? And when you're young, man, you think you know a lot. Now, who can look back at your life and say, boy, was I wrong about some stuff? Ignorant, because I was ignorant. And when I was ignorant, I was sincere. You can be sincere and be sincerely wrong. This is also important. It's not always bad that you believe very strongly what you believe. But what you don't realize is that there's so much that you still have not been exposed to. And so what happens in Paul's encounter here is he's blind. And it's very symbolic. It's the one who thought he could see, the one who thought he knew is completely blind. And this will happen to you in your identity crisis. God's going to humble you, take things away from you. I never read that in the Bible. Like, all the stuff I learned was that God just does good things for us. Well, he does, but how many know sometimes God has to take you a couple steps back so he can take you forward? Have you found this to be true? I'm going to have to go a couple steps back here. That's okay, because God's going to take you forward. He's going to get his sight again. But first, he's got to humble himself. Now, Paul is blind, and someone has to lead him by hand all the rest of the way to Damascus. And he sits there blind. He is completely vulnerable and exposed. And that's what happens when we lose our identity. And we build up our identity, and we're known for this. Somebody was asking me the other day, I was with a men's group, and they were asking me, all the men were being asked this, what did you want to be known for when you were growing up? And I said, no question. I wanted to be tough. And I grew up in Flint, Michigan, and there was one thing I wanted to be known for, and I wanted to be known as tough. you know. And I don't know why, but if you grow up in Flint, Michigan, it's kind of a helpful thing. But, you know, eventually someone's tougher than you. Eventually your armor cracks. Eventually your Iron Man suit fails you. And then you have to find yourself, who you really are. And that's going to happen in life. You're going to lose a job. You're going to lose a relationship, you know, and things are going to fall apart on the outside, but that doesn't change your value on the inside. As we have been learning, you're a child of God, and God has selected you, chosen you. But you're going to have to go through this period of being vulnerable. Someone leading you around. How many know that was not a good feeling for Paul? Paul was in charge. Paul knew what he was doing. He had the papers. He had the team. He had the support. And now he's laying in this guy's house he's never met. He's blind, and he's just waiting for what's next. You ever been waiting? What's next, God? Just vulnerable, just exposed, all the stuff that we don't like, our identity being stripped from us. This powerful, intimidating figure is now a shadow of himself. And he gets this knock on the door from Ananias, who had gotten a vision from God, and Ananias was told to go to Paul and to put his hands on him. And God said to Ananias, "This man is my chosen instrument." He's my chosen instrument. So a few weeks ago, we went on a trip in the footsteps of the Apostle Paul, and I was struck by how Paul's life took a turnaround, and he began to see himself differently. Not in charge of himself, but in the hands of God. Here's a video for you. Today, I want to take you on a journey with me, the journey that I took with several of our group in the footsteps of the Apostle Paul. And the thing that we learn about the Apostle Paul is that Paul became an instrument in the hands of God. And one of the things that I learned very early in our trip as we made our way through the Mediterranean Sea and landed where Paul first landed on his first missionary journey in the city of Perga, is that Paul befriended a blacksmith. And this was brand new to me, and so I asked our tour guide a little bit more about it. Everybody, I'm here with our tour guide, Edip, and he's giving us the lay of the land in Pergam. Perge. Everybody, welcome to the ancient city of Perge. This is where Paul landed in Asia Minor when he first got off the boat from the Mediterranean Sea on his first missionary journey. We're going to see an incredible city behind us. But this is not where Paul stayed. This is just where Paul started in Asia Minor. So tell us about what was it like when Paul came here?
When Paul came in here, it was one of the most prosperous city with 70,000 people were living in it. It has high-end shops, the agoras, high-end buildings. One of the biggest bath complex of Anatolia was based in here.
Wow.
And
so this whole region, this was like the crown jewel.
Yep, definitely.
When Paul comes here.
Yeah.
Historical tradition says Paul becomes best friends with a blacksmith in this town.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he did use that networking later in his trips. And that blacksmith had a kind of shop back in there where we got the basilica right now.
Okay.
When St. Paul came from the port, from the marina, and stepped into the city from the fortress wall, he found a Jewish blacksmith shop right in here and a carpenter right in here. So Agul, I think is the name of the blacksmith, and he started coming and chatting with him and asked him if he needs some assistance or some help, and he was hammering and working a day, making his living, and he started chatting with people about Jesus Christ and whispering them about the story of the Old Testament. And some people start coming to blacksmith back and forth during the day because they were hearing he's speaking in an aristocrat way, because he had the highest education ever. He was speaking in Greek, writing in Greek. He'd speak Latin and writing in Latin, and he was Jewish. And they start gathering around of him. He spent almost 3 or 4 months here. But imagine the time of the Paul in here. We got the fanciest shopping mall back in there with the pillars.
Okay.
That 2 big towers is very glorious to get into. It's scaring you. Like when you get into a city, like having that big 2 towers. And
this is just a majestic entrance to the city.
And the first entrance is in the middle of the fortress walls.
Okay.
Looked like a kind of Roman entrance, but this looks like a kind of Hellenistic age entrance.
And this city, you were telling me, was the most beautiful city, even more beautiful than Rome.
Absolutely.
Not bigger, but more beautiful.
Designed in much better than Rome. And the water canal in the center.
Water flowing down the center of the road.
So this city is having pleasure.
Wow.
And you know about
this
the Roman,
is a ritzy town.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, having the Roman pleasure is like the Roman bath back in there, which is full of sins.
Yeah.
And Paul maybe did not start giving his preachers in the city because it will be faced with a big reaction.
Okay. Because they weren't ready for Paul here and yet. Okay.
But city in Antioch, the Jews over there were ready for Paul because they got the synagogue, they still had the mass, they still had the faith, they still have one God belief, they were not the pagans.
So Paul landed here, but he didn't really get a foothold here.
Absolutely.
He goes over the mountains, and that's where he gets...
Because he noticed by time, like, it's not going to work in here.
It's not going to work here. What he told me was local tradition acknowledges that when Paul went to this city of Perga on his missionary journey, that he befriended a blacksmith, and he and the blacksmith probably shared similar space together, probably because they were both tradesmen and they both were familiar with working with tools in their hands. And I got to thinking about it. You know, that's what Paul saw himself. He saw himself as a tool in the hands of God. Paul probably remembered the first time he went to gather his tools, because Paul was a tent maker. And much like this blacksmith friend of his, they were familiar with having these tools in their hands. Paul would have used an awl, and he would have used a needle and a knife to cut and to sew these tents to make them waterproof. And he started to understand that God had his hand on him just the way Paul had his hand on these tools. And later on, Paul would use another instrument, perhaps his most powerful instrument, the pen, as he began to write what we now call much of the New Testament, the letters of Paul, letters that changed human hearts for hundreds of years, now 2,000 years, and literally turned the world upside down. Paul was definitely an instrument in the hands of God. Well, the biggest thing that I wanted you to start to understand is the fundamental difference between thinking that your life is your own and realizing that you are an instrument in the hands of God. You ask yourself completely different questions. And unfortunately, you and we grew up in a culture where we're always asked, what do we want to do with our life? How many times are you asked, what do you want to do with your life? What a silly question. Who goes into their garage, opens up their toolbox, and asks their hammer, what do you want to do with your life? The problem is that we think our life is our own. Paul began to not only go through this experience, but then he began to write about it. One of his writings in 1 Corinthians 6, he writes this, you are not your own. 1 Corinthians 6, you were bought with a price. I didn't have time to show you all the video, and maybe we'll roll some more out online, but Edip was able to show me just beyond where we stood, was just outside the city a little further, was where they had a slave trade. They brought slaves in from all over the world, and they would buy and sell them. And that agora the shopping area that we were walking around, he was telling me the men would sit in the center, what they call the tavern, and they would drink, and the wives would walk the square, the perimeter, and they would shop. And he said the slaves would run back and forth with money, and the women would want something, and then they would tell the slave to come in, and they'd go to the man, and he'd say, get out of here, how much? And he'd hand some, and then they'd go back and back and forth, and that's how things worked. But slavery was so common in those days. So when Paul writes this, everybody knew what he was talking about. You are no longer your own. You were bought with a price. They bought and sold slaves right outside that city. What he was saying is, God has purchased you. You are not your own. You are God's servant. I'll tell you what, this will completely change everything about your life. And I know people push back and they go, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be God's servant. I want to do what I want to do. This is the result. This is what happens when you take charge of your own life that way. You think you're going to be so free. You think you're going to be so fulfilled. And here's the end result: anxiety. If you go back to the Iron Man movie, I know you'll probably watch it tonight, Iron Man 3. You know what happens to him when he's dragging his suit in the snow? He keeps having anxiety attacks. The thing that if you do research about today's culture that people are struggling with the most in this time of identity crisis? Anxiety. Why? Because when you are in charge of your life, and when you have problems and when things fall apart for you, this is the end result. You feel anxious. I'm unsure. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. But when you see yourself as an instrument in the hands of God, all the twists and turns that life brings, and it brings a lot of them, you just see, well, God has a purpose for this twist. God has a reason for this turn. I don't understand it now, but one day I will. You see, Paul begins to write about this. And Paul wrote letters back to these churches that we visited, and this was Paul writing once he got through his identity crisis. This is what he wrote. The very first verse, Galatians. Paul, an apostle. An apostle, he knew who he was. An apostle means one who is sent by God. Sent by God. A tool in the hands of God. He says, sent not from men or by men, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father. This is so key to you. This is so key. This will change you. This will take the pressure off. This will deal with the anxiety. You are sent by God. Wherever you are, if you're sent to Ford, if you're sent to Clifford Smart, if you're sent to, the Wixom gas station, wherever you are, you were sent there, not by yourself, but you were sent there by God. And if you believe this it changes everything. Because I was explaining this to Brian because he's sharing a similar message with the students. And it's like, when you're chosen, God calls you, this is my instrument, this is my person. It helps you roll with the things of life. When I grew up in Flint, but then later I moved to another school to stay with my dad. And so I had to leave all of that behind. And I had my whole Flint identity. And then I had to find it. I was out in the farm country. And I had to find a whole new me. And I brought Flint basketball to this country school. And they didn't appreciate it. And the coach literally said to me, Cramer, we're not going to need any of that here. And I'm like, not the crossover, not the shake and bake, none of that. And he said, no, we don't need any of it. I thought for sure they did. And he said, no. And then I got transferred to another team, and the coach was constantly looking at, and if you've ever gone through this experience, I got nervous to shoot. I got nervous to play because I knew he was going to take me out. If you've ever done sports, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You do not play your best. And the next thing you know, I was getting pulled out, and then I was afraid to shoot. I was afraid I was going to miss. And my thing went just like this. Why? Because I wasn't confident. If you know, this is so important. If a coach grabs you and says, you're my guy, you go out there, you're going to brick a few shots, you're going to throw an air ball now and then, but you know he's not going to pull you out of the game because you were chosen. Do you get what I'm saying here? In life, if you know that you're chosen, if you know that God's put his hand on you, then yeah, you're gonna throw a few bricks up there. Yeah, you're gonna make some mistakes, but you're gonna walk with confidence because you're gonna know that I was chosen by God, as Paul wrote in Ephesians 1, before the foundations of the earth. Think about that. I don't need the approval of men. I've been called by God. I've been selected by God. Paul wrote about his struggles in Philippians chapter 3, about his old identity, about all the stuff that he thought made him so great. And I want to read it to you, and you can find your own parallel today, because there are reasons for false confidence, we can put it this way. But Paul had his identity crisis, and he wrote this. He goes, though I have reasons for confidence in the flesh, he calls it, that is in the shallow, I'll call it the shallow stuff, the stuff that other humans value. If anyone thinks he has reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I have even more. So if we're talking about resumes, then Paul goes through his resume. These were all the false identity stuff. Circumcised, he says, on the 8th day, that is, he was Jewish, he had his proper circumcision, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin. So he's giving all of his external markers. I'm this, I'm that. This is why I'm so important. A Hebrew of Hebrews in regards to a law, a Pharisee. Now today, that might not mean anything to a lot of us. But back then, he's just stacking up his resume. You know, this is like Harvard law grad, blah, blah, blah. You get what I'm saying? He's the top of his game. He's got the impeccable resume. I was so zealous. I persecuted the church. I was flawless in obedience to the law. All these things I did. He goes, but whatever were gains, I now consider loss. Now, everybody look here. Look. This is the identity crisis. You have all these things that you worked for all of your life that mattered so much. I want to be known as this. I want to be seen as that. I want to become this. And all of it is external. All of it is shallow. All of it is flesh. And it doesn't deal with who you really are deep down on the inside. He goes, it's all the loss compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Jesus Christ. It's all garbage. Man, that's freeing. It's freeing when you finally can realize that all the stuff that you once valued so much is not so important. Let your anxiety go. Let your fear fade away. And you become a brand new person in Christ. Paul's identity was because he no longer needed the approval of other people. Let's be honest. All of us, we grow up and we need the approval of others. It's just how we grow up. But the next phase of your life, when you're able to shed that skin, is you realize I'm not working for the approval. But you're not trying to be a jerk. You're not, of course not. You don't love disappointing people, but you're free from it. Do you get what I mean by free from it? It no longer drives you. It no longer masters you. It no longer owns you. Now you know who you are. Now listen carefully to this. If you know who you are, it becomes much easier to figure out what to do. A lot of people will start in life and go, what should I do? What should I do? Asking the wrong question. The question is, who are you? And the better question is this, not who are you, whose are you? You are not your own. You were bought with a price. You're God's instrument. Now what matters is, what is God calling me to do? What does God want me to do? Paul's blindness is important because he thought he knew so much. Psychologists say this is pretty interesting. We all kind of admitted we were ignorant about a lot of things. But did you know, even though you're ignorant and I talked you into voting for yourself, of being ignorant, you will only question 5% of what you believe. Think about that. It's just kind of how we're wired. I think psychologists say that kind of is what makes us stable. Otherwise, you would just be all over the place. In other words, we grow and we change slowly. You're only willing to challenge 5% of what you currently believe. We slowly will change. You remember when you started thinking differently about something and you thought, man, I don't know if that seems right. Jesus called it repentance. But what happens to us is we get blinded. We have to lose what we relied on so much. One person said it this way: we have a God experience like Paul did on the Damascus Road. Like we talked about last week, Moses did. He had the burning bush experience. And often what happens is we get burned but not destroyed. Think about it in your life. Your identity doesn't come from people. It doesn't come from your accomplishments. It doesn't come from your failures. It comes from your Creator. In Ephesians chapter 1, it says this, that God chose us before the foundations of the earth. He chose us in Him before the creation of the world. You couldn't have done anything good or bad before the creation of the world. I choose you. I choose you. Think about this. Think about this. God chose you to be here. That's unbelievable value. That's where your worth comes from. Now, here's the key. Ready? Now we can live our life from this identity, from this calling, not for it. Do you get the difference? When I'm working for it, it's like, if I achieve this, if I do this, then I'm valuable, then I'm wanted, then I matter. And so we're always striving, we're always anxious, we're always trying to prove who we are. But if you realize that you're called and chosen by God, you're a child of God, you work from that calling. You're like Michael Jordan. You can throw 7 air balls and you ain't coming out of the game because you're Michael Jordan. You're chosen. This is the difference from calling, not for identity. I'm God's child. I'm God's instrument. God has his hand on me. I was chosen before the creation of the world. So this is what I want you to do. I want you to think about that verse in Ephesians, and I want you to put your name in there, your name. Because sometimes you read the Bible and it's too distant. It's for other people. It's for superheroes like Paul. No, Paul was just like you and me, lost and confused about who he was. And you put your name in there. Chris was chosen before the creation of the world. That'll change you. Huh? Make a little footnote in your Bible. You were chosen. And we're here today to celebrate that. Every single person in this room. And as we go through the series, we're going to learn next week about how we were loved. And man, as we end the service today, we're going to remind ourselves of just how special you are in God's eyes. And we share the Lord's Supper together. When you think about that, or think about if you're a parent, your own children, to what lengths you would go for them. And you realize that God went all the way to the cross to demonstrate his love for each and every one of us, how valuable that we are. I'm so sad about the current identity crisis. It's got people doing crazy things. Because we weren't taught this very foundational thing that you are created and called and blessed and chosen by God. That's the foundation. And now people are just doing all kinds of things for attention, all kinds of crazy stuff on the internet just for attention, just to be noticed, just to feel that they matter. To have some sense of identity, to have some sense of value. But I'm telling you, friends, you got to go deeper than that. You got to go deeper than social media. You got to go deeper than your, quote, identity. All this external stuff is not going to get it. You have to go to foundation. You are called and chosen by God. So we're going to take the Lord's Supper together to remind ourselves who we are. We're a part of his family. We're a part of his family. We all belong. I'm going to ask you guys to begin in the front. You'll come and take the bread and the cup. If you'll hold on to it until we've all received, then we'll partake together. If you're with us online, please take a moment to grab something. We encourage you to join us as well. You guys can begin in the front. One of the greatest identities you will ever discover is your identity in the family of God. That you belong. And all of us need to belong. It's just how we're wired. And you will do unbelievably stupid things to try to belong places. It's just how we're wired. So we have to know fundamentally that we matter and that we belong. And that's why this was all settled. Before the creation of the world, God chose you to belong in his family. Christ demonstrated that for us, paid the price, purchased, if you will. So you're no longer your own. And for some of you, that's terrifying, but when you grow up, it's freeing. When you get it, it's freeing. You know, you belong to God. You were bought with a price. On the night he was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it. And he said, "This is my body, which is broken for you." Let's take the bread. And every one of us in a fresh way, before we take the cup, I just want you to make this declaration to God. First of all, I'm your child. I'm yours. I want you to acknowledge to God that my life is not my own. I belong to you. With gratitude in our hearts, with humility, we receive that calling. And the night he was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it. And then after the supper, he took the cup. He said, this is the new covenant. This is your new identity in Christ. The cup. Will you stand with me, everyone, across? You leave here today as an instrument in the hands of your Creator to do the work that He put you here to do. What should I do? Well, you should do the things that God put in front of you every single day. Now may the Lord bless you and keep you and make His face shine upon you. May He give you peace. And may God remind you every single day that you belong to Him, that you were chosen before the foundations of the world. In His name we give thanks and pray. Amen. Amen. God bless you, Orchard Grove. Happy Sunday.